In this final segment of our discussion, would love to talk about what's coming up next. So Maurice, I wonder if, starting with you, we could look at the prospects for reshoring over the next year, 3 years, and 5 years. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I don't have a definitive answer for that. Not surprising. And in fact, we're doing research now, surveying companies around the world, asking them, what decisions have you made? What are your intentions? And what are the reasons for making that? And what do you think the impact will be? And we're in the midst of collecting such data. All past studies have shown a remarkably high number of companies, on the order of 30–40%, admit publicly that they're considering or have made decisions to reshore or to restructure their supply chains. A comparable number are also thinking about outsourcing as well. So it's going in both directions. I would say we are at a time of great ferment, of great change. That there are a lot of factors that we've mentioned here on technology and education and government regulation, on cost trends that are driving this and will have different impacts in different countries and in different industries. I think that there's a realization that this is very important for the future, the welfare of our country. We have to get back to closer to where we were, and yet we will never get back to where we were as well. So it's going to be different. Technology has changed. So bottom line, it's going to increase. I'm an optimist. I think we're going to see multiple changes in different industries. But it's a global economy. We're not going to go back to where we were in the 1950s, where we dominated in certain industries, and we have to learn to live with the fact that every region in the world has the same objectives. They want their children to be employed. They want them to have valuable jobs. They want them to have, to add value. And so I think that what the equilibrium will be, I don't know. But I think generally we've seen the low point, and I think we're improving. And I think over the next 5–10 years, we're going to see more manufacturing jobs come back. And so bottom line, I'll say I'm an optimist.
What does your crystal ball say, Scott?
Yeah, on the technology side, I'm very optimistic as well. But I think that it's important to understand what the secret formula is for setting up U.S. delivery centers in the various parts of the country. And the best formula is to be in partnership with a major research university in a Tier 2 city that keeps costs down and in a business-friendly state. And I think when you look across the country, there's a finite number of them. So I think what you're going to see over the next year or two is a mad dash to set up partnerships with those universities, cities, and states. Mindtree, as I mentioned earlier, has set up a 400-person center in Gainesville, Florida with the University of Florida. But we're going to open up another one this year in the Midwest and another one a year later in either the Mountain Time Zone or the Pacific Time Zone. And then we're just one company in the space. There's other companies, doing it as well. So I think at some point that we're going to get to an area where that there's a cap to how much we can do, and we really need the tech talent to continually increase, and maybe other universities to step up. We can't just rely on the big engineering schools. Maybe some other universities will step up and some other states will step up. But I think the most important thing to realize is that it takes that ecosystem in order to make these things successful. You can't just have one of those pieces in place and think it's going to work. So I'm very optimistic, but at the same time, I know we've got to move fast to make sure that we stay ahead of our competitors in lining up these partnerships.
So in addition to Florida, which other states are likely to benefit the most from this trend?
Yeah, so I think it's got to be in states that have high-tech talent, but can keep the costs down. Because at the end of the day, cost is still a driver. And when a CIO is making a decision about where they're going to put the tech talent, cost does come in. They're running a business. It doesn't have to mean that they have to match cost overseas. It just has to be a competitive cost. And so again, it's a finite number of states and cities and universities that can pull this off. And I think the good news is that they're all rallying to that cause right now. They realize that there's a window now and that they need to get into that. And it's good news for everybody. But I think the most important thing is that we continue to enable kids to get into STEM and continue to increase the number of kids that are graduating, because there's certainly jobs for them.
Morris, what would you consider to be the kind of jobs that are most likely to come back to the U.S. Over the next few years?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's clear that the kind of jobs that are going to grow are not the jobs that we had in the past. They're going to have more information technology content. They're going to be more technology driven. I don't think we can compete in this country with providing low-cost labor in the way that maybe we provided it generations past. So it's got to be a more educated, more technologically savvy. The other thing that we haven't talked too much about is that we're in a service economy. 70% of all employment is in service. And one of the areas that I do a lot of research is in the interplay between services and manufacturing. And most products today are not just sold as products, they're sold as services, and they have services bundled with them. And most people, even in manufacturing companies, aren't making anything, they're providing services, either internally or externally. So I think that we have to understand we're in a service economy, we're in a high-tech economy, where skills are important, and the jobs that come back have to somehow leverage off the fact that there has to be a high service content, there has to be a high technology content. One final comment. Just last week we had a forum joint with Wharton and MIT on this topic. And our keynote speaker was Mike Molnar from the Bureau of Standards, who is heading up the White House program on manufacturing. And he announced that, or he described the current program that the federal government has put forward to promote all of this. And they are setting up centers of excellence across the country. They're getting different levels of schools, from community colleges to universities. They're getting companies, and it's a very exciting prospect. They're really getting a lot of input, and they're investing large amounts of money. They want to turn the tide. This has been, President Obama said in his State of the Union, we're going to do this. And they now have launched a program. So I think this is good. And the states are also doing this, and the cities. I was just asked to participate, or if I was interested in participating in an RFP from the city of Philadelphia, who wants to add manufacturing jobs to the city of Philadelphia. Mayor Nutter has said, we have to promote this. So this is happening at all levels of government, in all locations. Everybody recognizes what the problem is. And so I think with all of that ingenuity and all of that attention that this country can throw at it, I think we're going to see some interesting things happen.
That's really interesting. Scott, what do you think in terms of the kind of work that can be done in a place like Bangalore versus what can be done in Florida? Are you seeing different jobs coming back to the U.S. than what may have been sent overseas? I
think it's a little different in the tech space, because I think there'll be a small percentage of jobs that come back, but I think what's more important for job growth in the U.S. in the tech space is that the pie in general is growing. So the jobs that are created here in the U.S. on the technology side will probably be slightly different than what was outsourced in the future. One of the big trends in technology is a move toward agile software development. Agile software development is a faster way to build applications, but it requires a much more high level of touch with the business user who's driving the requirements. And it's hard to do that from 7,000 miles away or wherever you might be. So a lot of the tech jobs that we're creating in the States and that we're seeing our competitors create are more focused on projects that require a high level of touch with a business user, almost a day-to-day interaction or multiple interaction points per day, and a change toward faster software development so that companies can hit these time-to-market aspects that they're looking for. The other thing is, obviously, there's a drive toward mobile app development. And there's certain components of mobile app development that are easier done in the States as well, because same reasons that the process of creating a mobile app is a very visual process. And you want to be sharing those visual constructs with your business user on a very interactive, almost dynamic basis. So there's a lot of change that's certainly happening in the industry in terms of how things get developed and certain technologies. So I think the nearshoring, the reshoring that's occurring in the tech space, a lot of it's being driven just by the new things that are happening in the space.
Great. Now, as the phenomenon of reshoring plays out over the future, do you think it's going to lead to some sort of a global shift in competitive advantage between the US and the emerging markets, or will things never really go that far? What do you think?
I think there has been fundamental shifts. One of the things we haven't touched on is demographics. We say we need jobs, we need high-tech jobs, we need jobs. Where are we going to find them? You're going to find them in people in India. You're not going to find them going forward in China. You're certainly not going to find them in Japan. You're going to find them in South America. These are the large pools of available labor. And I think that it's clear that economic activity is going to have to continue to grow in those areas, notwithstanding they also have huge domestic markets. So there have been major shifts, and so the U.S. still is a leader. I'm not sure if today China is a bigger manufacturer than the U.S. They're about even now, and it's gone back and forth in the last year or so. But we no longer have the obvious assumed dominant position that we had a generation or two back. It's a much more competitive world. Everybody understands what the stakes are. And I think there's going to continue to be a shift and a balance. And I think this country and every country has to look for its comparative advantage. There are things in our marketplace that deal with innovation, with the nature of our markets, the nature of our population that give us certain advantages. And there are other places in the world where they have advantages. And so the balance is going to work out. So all I can say is the future will not be like the past.
And what about the IT industry?
Sure.
Do you see a competitive shift in advantage there?
Yeah, so I think the IT industry is, again, a little different because there's a global shortage of IT talent. And that is a little bit of a differentiator to the space that I'm in. And again, I think going back to what's happening with reshoring, I don't think it's an either-or combination between whether companies want to do the work in the U.S. or whether they want to do it offshore versus India. They actually want to do both. They want to have both options. But what I think where I think the biggest effect of reshoring will have is on the nearshore centers. So nearshore being primarily Canada, Mexico, Latin America, South America. I think what we're seeing from a pricing standpoint is that the difference in pricing between nearshore providers and onshore providers in these tier 2, high quality locations that we talked about is very thin. And so I think companies are starting to realize that there's not a lot of reason for them or a big driver for them to outsource IT work to a nearshore center versus doing it here in the States. What I think their nearshore centers will do is they will service their business in those regions. So, companies will have nearshore centers in South America, but primarily to support their business in that region, not necessarily to export IT work from the U.S. to that region. I think at the end of the day, they'll settle on 3 locations, which is doing work on site, doing work offshore in a low-cost place, high-quality place like India, and then doing work in onshore development centers or delivery centers. I think that's the shift that we think we'll see.
So just to wrap things up, I'd have one final question for each of you. Let's assume that a CEO of a major company comes to you, Morris, and says, so you're doing a lot of very interesting research on reshoring. How can my company, what advice would you give my company to take advantage of this phenomenon? What's in it for my company? What would you say?
Well, I think what I would say is that don't take anything for granted. I mean, there are a lot of generalities that have been stated about should you reshore, should you not reshore, where should you reshore, and these are generalities that don't hold up to scrutiny. I think that every company has to look at their situation, which is unique, and they have to look at it very extensively. They have to make a comprehensive analysis of the business case, taking into account all of these risk factors and cost trade-offs trying to understand what future scenarios there are. They have to do the analysis to support it. I think what has happened in the past is the wage cost differential was so high that it became the default. We'll offshore, it's a no-brainer, everybody else is doing it, we're going to do it. And now some are coming back, some are not coming back, some are combining it in a combination. It's a lot messier. It's a lot more complicated, as it should be. And I think that any company that would come to me, I'd say, let's look at the numbers, let's look at the strategic issues, and let's do an analysis that is appropriate for your company and your industry. Don't take things for granted.
Right. Same question for you, Scott. CEO has approached you with a proposition to possibly reshore IT operations. What's your advice to them?
I think I'd say three things. I would say, one, the time is right. I couldn't have said that 2, 3, 4 years ago. I can say that today. The time is right to look at this. The second thing I would say is pick your location very carefully. The success or failure of reshoring or building a tech center in the U.S. is very dependent on the location you pick. So look at the demographics, look at the trends. We did that when we picked our first center. We looked at the simple migration trends of the U.S. population and the business community, and it certainly shows east to west and north to south, which is why our first center is in Florida. It makes a lot of sense. People want to live there. You can attract tech talent there. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of high quality of life. Pick the center very carefully. If you pick it in a place that you won't be able to scale it, then it'll fail. And the third and last thing I would say is, talk to a company like a Mindtree who does this for a living. We can help with that process.
Great. Well, thanks to both of you for
Thank you very much.
stimulating discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.